Turn to chapter 2. I have taken the liberty to make extensions of how marriage is good. Indeed, in Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, we see that God says that it is not good for the man to be alone. And so, what God does, and we have read repeatedly, and we'll read again, what God does in verses 18 through 23 is he presents to the man woman, bringing good to man in the marriage that God officiates, joining Adam to Eve. Genesis chapter 2, starting in verse 18, we read, Then Yahweh God said, It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make him a helper suitable for him. And out of the ground Yahweh God had formed every beast of the field and every bird of the sky, and he brought each to the man to see what he would call it. And whatever the man called a living creature, that was its name. And the man gave names to all the cattle, and to the birds of the sky, and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found a suitable helper for him. So Yahweh God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept. Then he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh at that place. And Yahweh God fashioned the rib which he had taken from the man into a woman, and he brought her to the man. Then the man said, This one finally is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, because this one was taken out of man. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. Well, the logic of being able to understand God's creation institution of marriage to be good is very clear from this narrative. Verse 18 shows us that it was not good for the man to be alone, and Yahweh takes it upon himself to solve this issue. We then are able to see in verse 20 that after God paraded the animals in front of Adam, the conclusion is there was not found a suitable helper for him. The particular way in which God brought the woman into being was that it was a rib. Matthew Henry says it's not from his feet so that he would stand over her, or from his head so that she would be over him, but rather from his side so that she would be beside him. And in this sense, we are able to see that both 18 and 20, and then the process by which God takes from the man, from his rib, and then fashions woman and presents her to him, she is a helper fit for him. We have summarized marriage to be unchangeable, to be universal, and lastly, to be good. And here we will see that marriage is good for the mutual care, comfort, and communion of the husband and wife. That is what is involved in being a suitable helper. Some of you have taken vows that sound like this. I've led a number of you in saying these very things. You said I, and you gave your name. Take you, and you inserted your spouse's name. To be my wedded, to be wife. And in this case, I will read what is said for the husband: to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish till death us depart, according to God's holy law. In the presence of God, I make this vow. The wife would respond to the husband making this vow with the following: I take you to be my husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love, cherish, and to obey, till death us do part. According to God's holy law, in the presence of God, I make this vow. And then you exchanged rings as a sign of the covenant that you have made before God. And so you said something like this: with this ring as a token of my affection and covenant, I promise to cherish you and to be faithful to you according to the sacred vows I have just made. With this ring I thee wed, and with my body I thee serve, and with all my worldly goods I thee endow. And the wife accepted the ring and said, I will wear it as a sign and evidence of your affection and covenant, and it will remind me to discharge to you my duties and privileges as your wife. Similarly, a wife would be led to say, when she has the ring, giving it to her husband, with this ring as a token of my affection and covenant, I promise to cherish you and to be faithful to you according to the sacred vows I have just made. With this ring I thee wed, with my body I thee serve, and with all my worldly goods I thee endow. And the husband would receive it and say, I accept this ring, and I will wear it as a sign and evidence of your affection and our covenant. It will remind me to discharge to you my duties and privileges as your wife. As your husband. Now, notice in each of those how rich and full they are, describing what life in a fallen world is like. That in particular, the vows that were made, the vows that were received, the covenant that indeed was inaugurated right there by those vows, they include for worse, for poorer, in sickness. One of the things that God has designed marriage to do, indeed, while it was instituted by God in mankind's innocence in the garden before the fall, this particular institution is for man such that after the fall, in the curse, there would be mutual care and comfort and communion between the husband and the wife. This care, this comfort, this communion is not conditioned upon circumstances that make it easy to care, to give comfort, and to share communion or fellowship with the other. In fact, it is explicitly stated in marriage vows that you will do it in the circumstances that are intrinsically difficult. And yet, marriage is the very institution that in the theater of this fallen world, two people with cursed bodies, that they will give to the other care and comfort and communion. It's also worth noting, just as we have seen 4 Christians embrace their duties, 5 Christians embrace their duties, and we have also recited our own embrace of our duties towards them, so marriage too has duties and responsibilities. When we talk about the care and the comfort and the communion that the institution of marriage gives to the husband and to the wife, we need to understand that these 3 gifts that come with the covenant of marriage, they actually come because each does their duty in response to the covenant. When God presented Eve to Adam and then officiated their marriage and they became one flesh, it began their experience of receiving from the other care, comfort, and communion. I'd like to quickly go through these 3 C's that marriage gives. First, marriage does provide to husband and wife care. Care should be expanded to not just be a kind of affection or an emotional feeling about the other, but rather to be the distinct ways in which a husband and wife provide for their spouse in whatever the circumstance life demands. The care that the wife needs will be provided by the husband, giving his distinct duties which God commands of him, but applied in whatever theater of circumstance the marriage is in. Likewise, for the wife will provide the care for her husband by doing the very distinct duties that God commands of her, no matter the circumstance of the marriage. So we could give some illustrations. Wives, it will always be that when you give to your husband that which God has commanded you to give him, respect, submission, love, then there will be to him a care that you provide in circumstances. Many of those circumstances, he will not merit it. In fact, he will demerit such kind of care. And yet, the way you relate to him in obedience to God's commands, you will provide for him in the covenant relationship a kind of care. It will be a blessing to him because you are his wife. Likewise, husbands will provide for their wives a care as they execute their duties that God has commanded them to do: protection, provision, self-sacrifice. Love will be given to the wife in all circumstances because that is the duty of the husband in the covenant. And for his wife, whether she merits or not this kind of care, she will be the recipient of this blessing. We are therefore able, in one sense, to understand that some ways there is a mutual care that the wife and husband give to one another. It's very easy to illustrate this. Right now, Hannah is receiving from Ed a care because he is with his wife as she is in the hospital. But if Ed were in the same situation Hannah were in, then Hannah could provide the same kind of care. Some types of care sort of are interchangeable between husband and wife. But then there's other types of care that come in the covenant of marriage that will be uniquely contoured to what the husband gives to the wife and what the wife gives to the husband. Marriage, in that sense, has this unique design in God's hand to provide these blessings for a woman from her husband, from a man from his wife, and it cannot be given by anyone else. To say it another way, the kind of care that comes to a wife, to a woman who is married, this kind of care can only come from your husband. Or to reverse it, the kind of care that can come to a woman who is married, this kind of care will only come to her from her husband. No one else is able to provide this unique care that only the covenant of marriage provides for the husband and the wife. That's why there is a suitability in the traditional ways that we might say about the husband, really that sort of contour his role as head. He leads, he protects, he provides, he cherishes, he loves. And then we would say about the wife, the kind of care that follows the contours that she is his body, and thus she submits and follows him. She respects, she adores, she submits. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7, probably maybe turn over there, put your finger there. We'll have to turn here again, but Peter is giving instructions to both wives and husbands in chapter 3. And he says of the wife, and in the circumstances that he is addressing, it seems that this Christian woman is married to a non-Christian man. And here instructions are given to this wife in verse 1 of chapter 3. Be subject to your own husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives, as they observe your pure conduct with fear. Your adornment must not be merely external, braiding the hair and wearing gold jewelry or putting on garments, but let it be the hidden person of the heart with the incorruptible quality of a lowly and quiet spirit, which is precious in the sight of God. For in this way, in former times, the holy women also who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, being subject to their own husbands, just as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. You have become her children if you do good, not fearing any intimidation. Your husbands in the same way. You husbands in the same way, live with your wives in an understanding way, as with a weaker vessel, since she is a woman, and show her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life, so that your prayers will not be hindered. Here you're able to see, does Peter give the same instructions to the wife that he gives to the husband? No. They're distinct, they're different. And yet there is a unique care that comes to the husband by the wife responding in obedience to the Bible's commands, and there is a unique care that is given to the wife as the husband obeys God's commands. See, God has designed marriage to be an institution that provides care that no other institution, no other relationship will ever be able to meet. Marriage provides this unique care to the woman from her husband and to the man from his wife. Now, in Scripture, there's some illustrations. You might remember in 1 Samuel chapter 25 of a really foolish man named Nabal. But foolish though he was, he married a very wise woman, Abigail. And this foolish man, Nabal, is coming against David, and he acts the way foolish men act, like a fool. But his wise wife, Abigail, is able to go out and, in one sense, by her actions, intercede so that she might prevent the destruction of her husband and therefore of her family and of her people. And so she honors David. And thus she preserves the life of her husband. Now, David was even able to see the wisdom of Abigail, and with the death of her husband, David takes her to be his own wife. You might remember Rebekah as well, and though it is difficult, and maybe we don't make this observation, but when you consider if Isaac would have given the birthright to Esau, what kind of son would the birthright have gone to? A foolish son. A son who valued the birthright of the covenant blessings of God like a bowl of soup. And Rebekah, she sought and was effective for the birthright of Isaac not to fall on Esau, but on Jacob, the one whom God loved. Right? We see women in Scripture with great wisdom bringing blessing to their husbands, even in Nabal's case, when clearly he does not merit such a blessing from his wife. Wives are unique instruments of care for their husbands. Scripture also will show, by example, that husbands are unique instruments of care for their wives. Probably the most dramatic example of this would be Joseph. In Matthew chapter 1, verses 24 and 25, we are told that when Joseph woke from sleep, as the angel reveals to him the identity of the child and his betrothed, that is Mary's womb, Joseph did what the angel of the Lord commanded him to do, and he took his wife, but knew her not until she had given birth to a son, and he called his name Jesus. Now, in one sense, we could sum that up and say, Joseph obeyed God. but at what cost? Can you imagine walking around our little city with your betrothed who is great with child? Joseph willingly received whatever shame and ridicule would come to him in obedience to God's command, so that indeed he would honor Mary, and adopted the child that she bore and named him what God commanded to name him, Jesus. Matthew chapter 2, verses 14 and 15 tells us, what else did Joseph do? He led Mary and Jesus into Egypt to protect them from Herod's wrath. Now, Matthew tells us that this was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son, but the means was Joseph's leadership to provide and protect for Mary and for Jesus. Husband and wife, though different and distinct in their relationship to their spouse, they provide a unique care to the other. Care is given in marriage when one spouse gives to the other, out of their respective role, that which God holds them responsible to do in their marriage. Please notice that nothing in the way we construct care there was determined by the conditions. Now, the conditions, the environment of the marriage will demand care to be given, but whether the husband or the wife gives the care is absolutely unconditional. The condition for giving care to your spouse is called marriage. And when you marry, you've committed yourself for the rest of your life to give to your spouse the care God commands you to give. And are we not able to see that and to say, that is beautiful? We also add to care comfort. One of the things that life in this world really does need is there needs to be comfort. For those of you who are young and your skin is all fresh and your muscles are all tight, enjoy it. It will be gone very soon. Chris Foy were here, I'd make a joke about his, pickleball championship. He too, like Peter, will be falling in pickleball. Well, the one thing that you can be promised in this life is pain. I can promise you suffering. I can promise you trials. I can promise you difficulty. If anybody ever with the name of Christian stands behind anything like a pulpit and something that seems like a church, and they promise you that you will not suffer, they are lying and you need to run. This life is full of trials. Is God not good that he would give to us an institution that another human being in whom we are most intimately connected with would provide for us in every season comfort? God gives to us in this fallen world with these fallen bodies a comfort from our spouses, for he has instituted marriage. Though in it Adam's innocence in the garden, yet it would extend through the cursed life in our exile from God's presence. Indeed, this is clear because the two become one. The metaphor that Paul goes on to connect with the husband and his wife, with Christ and his church, that just as Christ is the head of the church and the church is Christ's body, so the husband is head of the wife and she is his body. What that does for us is understand that there is an indivisible nature to the relationship of husband and wife that demands, like Christ in the church, everything that the head does is for the nourishment of his body. And everything that the body does is in service to its head. And so Jesus, as our priest, is what kind of priest? A sympathetic high priest. So a husband is toward his wife one who is sympathetic with her, as we just read in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7, that he lives with her in an understanding way, knowing that she, by God's design, is a weaker vessel. See, there is a oneness to the relationship of the husband and wife that enables each to comfort the other, for they are one flesh. And the comforts that the husband gives to the wife and the wife gives to the other come in the trials and tribulations of this life and their unique intimacy as those who are married and thus in a one flesh union. It's easy to see that in marriages where one of the spouse is fundamentally selfish, that this kind of comfort does not come. The reason that marriages do not know and taste this kind of comfort is because one or both of those spouses is actually not giving themselves for the sake of the other, but rather is seeking to extract from the other. Now, as one who has had cancer, I do not use cancer as an illustration lightly. But you probably know the nature of the disease. One cell becomes, in one sense, absorbed with itself and massively reproduces itself. And in that enterprise, it takes the life of the body if it is not addressed. That's what selfishness is. A marriage where one spouse or both spouses are, in that sense, they're acting like a cancer cell, thinking that this relationship exists for me to take for myself from the other, is a fundamental rebellion against the very nature of the institution. The nature of the institution of marriage is for you to join so that you might give yourself for the good of your spouse. And that is so clearly manifest when life in this world is marked by trials and tribulations, and the spouse gives for the other. And this is a comfort that God has designed the marriage relationship to uniquely provide to those who enter into it. It is necessary to say, most young people are not thinking about reality when they sort of lock eyes with someone and eventually end up standing before a congregation and taking vows, do they? Often in our society, there is a huge confusion with, like, why would you see yourself living for the rest of your life with this person? In our society, unfortunately, even Christians, it's because there is a great physical attraction to the other person. You can put any man and any woman in a room long enough, and eventually there will be physical attraction. But what kind of relationship enables for you to see another person such that you would, like, I want to give my life in self-sacrifice and devotion through disease and difficulty and eventually to their dying day? Young people, you need to understand that's what you're looking for when you consider a potential spouse. You're looking for someone who is going to walk through the most difficult days of your life, and they will be with you and they will comfort you. And when things get especially difficult, they are the kind of person who draws near to you and does not pull away from you. They are the kind of person who is in it to comfort you from the resources God in His grace may give to them. They're the kind of person who is going to relate to their spouse in one sense as their own body, and no one that I know who's not got some real problems no one loves to hurt. We remedy pain. So a spouse will seek to remedy as best they can to comfort their spouse as they go through trials and difficulties in this present life. This is why, and I'll use my wife as an illustration, for indeed she has done this. When I was 30 and had cancer, a good bit of my time was spent for 6 months lying in a bed or a cot. And I could see my wife going through the house without anyone helping her, with no breaks, of doing all of the work necessary. And she was often barefoot. And if you're laying like on a cot on the ground, like what's your view are people's feet. And I just constantly saw her bare feet walking and working. And she had no help from her husband. That is beautiful comfort. To be able, in that sense, also to say, I'm going to have to take him to the hospital, when indeed there's so many things that I need to be able to do, but yet that is what was required, and that is what she gave. For those of you who are single, you need to be thinking about marriage in these terms. What kind of person will make a spouse who will comfort you when you need to be taken to the hospital? All that glitters when you are young, I promise, it ain't gold, and it will quickly lose its shine. But the character of godliness and self-sacrifice, we could call that love, that will show itself in the marriage covenant and giving of oneself away, that only gets more and more beautiful. Marriage is the institution that gives this kind of comfort. Now, studies, not that we need studies to confirm that this is good for us, but studies have confirmed what we would expect to find for those who are married and live in this kind of relationship with their spouse. The data is not just from Christians who are married, the data is from Christians and non-Christians. But the data shows that married people are more happy than unmarried and cohabitating people. Married people are more stable in crisis, which is to say, married people commit suicide less than those who cohabitate or who are not married. Married people are more physically healthy. Just ask any married man. What were you like when you were single? And he would tell you the garbage that he ate and the unsanitary place in which he lived. And then he would describe to you, like, let me tell you what I ate last night. It is not hard to be able to figure out some of the reasons that there are far more benefits to married life than single life, but physical health is higher with those who are married than with those who are not married and cohabitate. Married people are also more financially stable than unmarried or cohabitating people. I understand that cohabitation is rising in our society. I understand also that maybe even some of the marriage rates are a little bit off because of the increase of cohabitation. I also know, and this blows my mind, that for somehow confessing Christians think that cohabitation is allowable. And so you need to understand cohabitation is not pleasing to God and should not be considered something that Christians should ever consider in a dating relationship. It is in no way a test run to marriage. Now, a number of us have cohabitated prior to our marriage, so we know God is gracious and God works good things out of our ruinous decisions. But in order for those of you who are not married, for you to understand God's way is good and God brings blessing to those who enter into marriage, I do want to make a case that you hopefully will remember against cohabitation. Cohabitation does not share the benefits that studies reveal married couples experience. Those people who are not married but cohabitate, they are outmatched by married people in every major category of life. Some of the reasons are cohabitation does not have the clarity of marriage's expectations and commitment, and thus they are marked by ambiguity and uncertainty. Likewise, those who cohabitate often separate their money, and thus they suffer financially. Those who cohabitate also spend more time apart than those who are married. Those who cohabitate also do not enjoy the same support from their partner's family as those who are married. Cohabitation is not a sort of modern evolution of marriage that is equal. It is inferior, and it ultimately is not God's plan. Christians and non-Christians alike need to understand that God in his common grace gives blessings, good things in the institution of marriage. Care and comfort are two of those blessings. Again, not restricted just to Christians who marry. But the last one is communion. I'm going to use the word communion, and it's not the best word. I'm trying to use a word. It could be that fellowship would be a better word. I use communion because obviously it is a C and it's alliteration. So, but here's what I mean by communion. I mean that there is a fellowship that exists between the husband and a wife that is much more than just friendship. This is not to make light of friendship. It is not to, in one sense, to say that it's sort of not a friendship. It is friendship, but it's more than friendship. See, friendships are often temporal. They might be bound to a common place, to a common interest, to a common period of life. I mean, I could just ask you, for those of you who are like under 30, how many friends do you have that are over 40? When's the last time you hung out with someone over 40? Probably not very often, right? Our friendships tend to be on the basis of kind of these like qualities. And in that sense, friendships can change. These particular bonds of common interests or likeness, they can indeed change. The communion or fellowship that a husband and wife have, they do not change. It is like a friendship, but it is far more than that. The fellowship that the husband shares with his wife and the wife shares with her husband in marriage is not to wane, because they are not to move away from the other and having an interest for the other's good. Marriages, they can enjoy the same common interests. I'd just like you to know me and my wife doesn't like to go surfing, and I don't really care for my wife to go surfing, and it hasn't harmed our marriage at all. Maybe it's helped because I'm probably pretty selfish when I go surfing. We like football. We like food, all right? Common interests can be a part of marriage, but I want you to hear this. Common interests are not the defining feature of the communion or fellowship that I'm talking about that marriage brings as a blessing. This communion or fellowship of marriage is made, and get this, it is made through the loyal self-sacrifice and love of giving yourself away for the good of the other. That's what totally separates the communion or fellowship that a husband and wife have with one another from other very significant and very good friendships. I know Aristotle is not inspired. I'm in no way interested in trying to make Aristotle equivalent with Scripture. But from time to time, a blonde squirrel finds a nut, and Aristotle I think, says that greater relationships are subsumed by lesser relationships. The marriage relationship is the greater relationship that you will have with another person in this life, and you will find it subsuming lesser relationships. I can promise you that what's going to happen for Hannah and Mark, I'm sorry, Haley, you're getting here. Hannah and Ed, Haley is here, Mark is her husband, all right? But Ed's love for and desire of fellowship with Hannah, walking through this trial, is going to make his enjoyment and fellowship with her to be greater than maybe even some of his buddies that he liked to hang out with beforehand. One of the heroes that I have come to always have, or I love old men. It used to be like that would be my dad. And then they become like grandfathers. All right. So now, basically, if you are old, you are my hero. I'm so impressed with old people. And I especially love the marriages of old people. That kind of devotion that is manifest as they care for one another when the body begins to fail. They have such a unique beauty. And one of the things that has been very clear is I've been able to talk with some in our own church, and I'll use Robert Hardison as an example. Robert Hardison has enjoyed many friendships. I've learned about a number of Robert's friends that he's had. He loves with some of you. You've had breakfast on Saturdays on a regular basis with Robert. He loves to eat breakfast with his fellows. But who has Robert's attention gone to in the last 10 years? City. His desires and his interests, they become primarily absorbed with his wife. And that's the way it should be. There is a uniqueness to the communion, to the fellowship, even friendship, but it's more than that, that the marriage companionship begins to be the chief relationship that subsumes the lesser relationships. This does not mean that the husband and wife are not to have friendships. However, I would strongly caution against relationships with someone of the opposite sex. But friendships are indeed good for a husband to have with fellows and for a wife to have with ladies. But these friendships are not competitors with their marriage communion. The marriage fellowship is a species altogether different than those friendships. The fellowships of the husband and the wife, they have a superior quality and character that distinguishes it. For it is one that indeed demands and is built off of love, self-sacrifice, and loyalty. And for the Christian husband and wife, they add to this a commitment to holiness. This is, I think, why when Peter says that the wife is a co-heir of the grace of life, it seems that this would be the grace which is life. If not, Ecclesiastes 9 says the same thing. The preacher there commands, enjoy life with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain life that he hath given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life and in your toil at which you toil under the sun. See, God in marriage gives to the man a kind of fellowship with his wife that will be unmatched. And God gives to the woman and her husband the same thing. In one sense, as I consider what could a non-Christian come to know that would be, in one sense, the greatest blessing of God apart from salvation in Christ? I'd say the greatest thing that that non-Christian may could know would be God's common grace shown to them in the institution of marriage. If they happen by God's merciful care of them, if they were to happen to just marry a noble person, then in the way in which that marriage worked, if it was indeed arranged according to God's institution, God would give them a blessing. Now, it would end with this life. But there is something unique about the good that God gives in marriage: care, comfort, and companionship. Charles Spurgeon said, "In a true marriage, the husband and wife become one. Henceforth, their joys and their cares, their hopes and their labors, their sorrows and their pleasures rise and blend together in one stream." This is one of the ways that we rightly say marriage is good. Next week, we'll return and consider, and this will be the last sermon in this sort of series about marriage being good. We will see that it's good for the church and for civilization. And lastly, marriage is good for the gospel.